I went back home to retrieve my car documents and overheard my husband on the phone. He admitted that he had cut the brakes on my car himself and was arranging to meet someone at your sister's funeral. I quietly closed the door, called a tow truck, and had the car towed to my father-in-law's house, a surprise gift from me and his son. That evening, my husband was the one who received the real surprise. Keisha Holt was the oldest daughter in the family. She had taken care of Layla since childhood, even though the age gap wasn't huge, just 4 years. Her younger sister had frequently set her up, and despite the fact that they were both grown women now, Layla continued to envy Keisha and throw a wrench in her plans whenever possible. Keisha sat at her desk, immersed in studying the quarterly reports. The numbers were starting to blur before her eyes. She had been working for 4 hours straight without a break. Outside the window, a light autumn rain was falling, drumming a monotonous rhythm against the glass. The office of Holt & Sons was located on the 7th floor of a downtown business center, offering a decent view of the gray city wrapped in a rainy haze. "Keisha, you want some coffee?" asked Monique, her colleague and best friend for the last 5 years. "Haha, thanks." Keisha nodded absently, not tearing her eyes away from the monitor. Monique got up from her desk, which sat opposite Keisha's, and headed toward the coffee machine in the corner of the spacious office. They worked together in the financial analysis department, and this proximity had long ago grown into a genuine friendship. Monique knew practically everything about Keisha, the complicated relationship with her younger sister Layla and her challenging family life. The sound of the coffee machine filled the office with a familiar, cozy hum. Keisha stretched, working out the stiffness in her neck, and checked the time, 2:30. 3 more hours until the end of the workday, and then she could go home, take a hot bath, and forget about these endless figures. There was a knock at the door, sharp, persistent. "Come in," Keisha called out, smoothing back her dark hair, which was pulled into a neat ponytail. The door opened, and a courier in a blue uniform appeared on the threshold. He was a young guy, maybe 25 years old, with a tablet in his hands. "Good afternoon. Are you Keisha Holt?" he asked, checking the data on his screen. "Yes, that's me," Keisha smiled, setting her pen aside. She had no idea that in a minute she would be holding her own sentence in her hands. The courier handed her a white envelope with no return address and no sender's name. Keisha mechanically signed the tablet, thanked him, and watched the young man until he disappeared behind the door. The envelope was heavy and thick. She turned it over in her hands, trying to figure out who could have sent such a package. "What's in there?" Monique asked, returning with 2 cups of steaming coffee. "I don't know. I'm about to look." Keisha ran her finger along the edge of the envelope, tearing it open. Inside were photographs, several glossy prints on high-quality paper. Keisha pulled them out and froze. Her heart skipped a beat, then began to hammer somewhere in her throat, making it hard to breathe. In the first photo, Layla, her younger sister, was standing in an embrace with a man. Keisha recognized him instantly. Sterling Holt, her father-in-law, her husband Dante's father, and the CEO of the company where she worked. Her hands began to tremble. Keisha quickly flipped through the rest of the shots. Layla and Sterling in a restaurant, Layla and Sterling walking out of a hotel, Layla and Sterling kissing in a car. In every photograph, they were together, so close that there was absolutely no doubt about the nature of their relationship. "No, this can't be," Keisha whispered, feeling the blood drain from her face. The room swam before her eyes. The walls seemed to be closing in. The air became thick and heavy. Keisha tried to take a breath, but her lungs wouldn't cooperate. "Keisha!" Monique rushed to her friend, barely managing to set the cups on the table. She caught Keisha by the elbow, stopping her from sliding off the chair. The photos slipped from her weak fingers and scattered across the floor in a fan. "Girl, what happened?" "Keisha, can you hear me?" Monique tapped her lightly on the cheeks, trying to bring her back to reality. Keisha blinked, focusing her gaze on her friend's worried face. Monique quickly grabbed a cup, poured some water from the cooler, and brought it to her lips. "Drink slowly." She held the cup while Keisha took small sips. The cold water burned her throat but helped her come to her senses a little. Keisha inhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the desk with knuckles that had turned white. "I'm in shock," she squeezed out, looking at the photos scattered on the floor. Monique followed her gaze, squatted down, and picked up the pictures. With every new photo, her eyes went wider. She returned to the table and laid them out, as if trying to verify that this wasn't a hallucination. What? Monique stared at Keisha. Your sister is Sterling's mistress? This is just impossible. He's married to your mother-in-law. God, Keisha, this is Layla, was all Keisha could say. It's so like her. She covered her face with her hands, trying to master her emotions. Betrayal. Such a familiar, habitual betrayal from her younger sister. How many times in childhood had Layla set her up? How many times had she taken what belonged to Keisha? How many times had she been envious and plotted against her? But this was beyond the pale. Hey, look. Monique gently touched her shoulder. There's not just photos here. Look. She pulled a folded sheet of paper from the envelope. Keisha smoothed it out with trembling hands and read what was written. If you don't want your mother-in-law to find out about your sister's affair with her husband, quit. You have exactly 4 days. The letters were printed, faceless, cold, threatening. No signature, no hint of who was behind this blackmail. It's Layla. Keisha clenched the letter in her fist. It's definitely her. Who else could it be? But why? Monique looked at her friend quizzically. Why drive you out of your job? She's always wanted what I have. Keisha chuckled bitterly. We've lived like this since we were kids. I'm the oldest. I was always responsible, taking care of her, and she just took what she wanted and didn't give a damn if she destroyed everything in the process. But this is your job. You've been here 5 years. You're one of the best analysts in the company. Monique, you know Layla, Keisha shook her head. To her, this is a game. She sees that I have a good job, a loving husband, a position in the Holt family, shaky as it may be, and that's enough for her to want to ruin it all. Hell no, Monique exclaimed, jumping up from her chair. You are not going to let them manipulate you, Keisha. Let's think. We can go to Patricia, show her these photos, let her deal with her cheating husband herself. Keisha wanted to answer, but instead she froze, listening to her own body. A strange heaviness began to spread in her lower abdomen. At first light, almost imperceptible, then stronger. A second later, a sharp pain pierced her, forcing her to double over. Ah! It escaped her involuntarily. Keisha, what's wrong? Monique darted toward her. It hurts. Keisha wrapped her arms around her stomach, trying to quell the pain, but it only intensified, rolling over her in waves. Monique, I can't breathe. Jesus, what is happening? Monique grabbed the phone from the desk. Hold on, girl. I'm calling 911. Keisha slid from the chair onto the floor, unable to sit any longer. The pain was unbearable, searing. She heard Monique speaking quickly into the receiver, giving the address, describing the symptoms. Her friend's voice sounded like it was coming from far away, through cotton. Don't close your eyes. Do you hear me? Monique knelt beside her, supporting her head. Keisha, hang on. The ambulance is coming. They'll be here in 10 minutes. What's happening to me? Keisha whispered, feeling tears streaming down her cheeks. I don't know, honey, but you're gonna make it. You're strong. You've always been strong. Monique stroked her hair, trying to calm her. Just hang in there a little longer. Just a little bit. The minutes dragged on painfully slowly. Keisha lay on the cold office floor, squeezing Monique's hand so hard her friend's skin turned white. The photographs and the letter remained on the desk, silent witnesses to how, in just a few minutes, the life she had so carefully built had collapsed. When footsteps finally echoed in the corridor and paramedics with a stretcher burst through the door, Keisha could almost no longer feel the pain, only emptiness inside, a cold, all-consuming void. BP is low, pulse is rapid, one of the EMTs stated quickly, examining her. We need to get to the hospital immediately. Suspected internal bleeding. Keisha was carefully transferred to the stretcher. Monique grabbed her purse and followed. I'm riding with her, she told the medics in a tone that made arguing useless. Monique, the photos. Keisha exhaled weakly as they carried her out of the office. I got everything. Don't worry. Right now the main thing is your health. The elevator, the corridor, the ambulance. Everything blurred into one smeared frame. The siren wailed overhead, and the vehicle tore off, carrying Keisha toward news that would turn her life upside down completely. Dante Holt sat on a hard plastic chair in the hospital hallway, staring at the floor. The white tiles beneath his feet were polished to a shine, reflecting the fluorescent lights that stung his eyes. The smell of bleach and medicine dug into his nostrils, inducing nausea. He nervously fiddled with the phone in his hands, turning the screen on and off. The call from Monique had caught him in an important meeting with potential investors. He remembered how his heart had dropped when he heard her agitated voice. "Dante, something happened to Keisha. We're at the hospital. Come immediately." He had flown out of the conference without finishing the presentation or saying goodbye to the partners, making it to the city hospital in 20 minutes, though the drive usually took 40. Monique met him at the ER intake, pale and bewildered. "Where is she? What happened?" Dante lunged at her, grabbing her by the shoulders. "They took her to surgery." Monique swallowed with difficulty. "Internal bleeding started." "Dante, I don't know the details. The doctors aren't saying anything. But what happened?" "She was fine this morning." He raised his voice, and several nurses turned toward the noise. "I don't know. We were working, then a courier came, and then suddenly she got sick." Monique lowered her eyes. "I called the ambulance as soon as I realized it was serious." Dante ran a hand over his face, trying to pull himself together. "Surgery. Internal bleeding." These words sounded terrifying, like a sentence. He tried to question the nurse on duty, but she only said dryly that information would be available after the operation and suggested he wait in the hallway. And so he had been sitting here for almost 2 hours. Monique had left 40 minutes ago, promising to return with coffee and something to eat, but Dante wasn't even sure he could swallow anything. Anxiety squeezed his throat with an iron grip. Beside him on the chair lay Keisha's purse, which Monique had brought. Dante mechanically fingered the strap, guessing what could have cut his wife down so suddenly. She was always strong, healthy, never complained. Maybe she was hiding an illness, or was it something sudden? The doors to the surgical wing swung open, and a doctor in blue scrubs walked out. He was pulling off his gloves, his face tired but calm. Dante instantly jumped to his feet, nearly knocking over the chair. "Doctor!" He rushed toward him. "Doctor, how's my wife?" "Keisha Holt." The doctor stopped, looked at him carefully, and nodded. "You are the husband?" Yes. "Dante Holt. Tell me, what's wrong with her? Is she okay?" The doctor sighed, and in that sigh Dante caught something heavy, bitter. "Your wife's condition is stable now." The doctor began slowly, choosing his words. "The surgery was successful. We stopped the bleeding. She is out of danger." Dante exhaled so loudly it sounded almost like a sob. His knees went weak with relief. Thank God. Thank God." But the doctor raised a hand, stopping his joy. "There is one circumstance. Unfortunately, she lost the baby. Please accept my condolences." The world around him froze. Dante stared at the doctor, not understanding if he had heard correctly. "What?" he asked dully. "The baby, yes. Your wife was pregnant, early term, about 5 or 6 weeks. Unfortunately, due to severe stress and the subsequent bleeding, a miscarriage occurred." Dante swayed. The doctor stepped forward, ready to catch him, but he put out a hand, refusing help. But she didn't say she was pregnant," he mumbled, as if trying to convince himself it was some kind of mistake. "It was early," the doctor shrugged. Perhaps Keisha didn't know herself yet, although women usually sense these things. There are cases where pregnancy is only discovered during an examination. Dante sank back onto the chair, unable to stand. A child. They were going to have a child. And now it was gone. "When can I see her?" he asked in a strangled voice. "She'll be moved to a room in half an hour, as soon as the anesthesia wears off. Post-op ward, 3rd floor, room 12. The doctor patted him on the shoulder and walked away, leaving Dante alone with his thoughts. He sat motionless, staring into the void. A child. They hadn't even discussed children lately. Work, career, business. All of that overshadowed talk of the future. And now it turned out the future had already been growing inside Keisha, and it had died without ever really beginning. Monique returned with 2 paper cups of coffee and a bag of sandwiches. "Well, any news?" she asked, handing him a coffee. She's okay, Dante answered mechanically. Surgery was successful. Thank God. Monique exhaled in relief. I was so worried. But she lost the baby. Monique froze. The coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. What? She was pregnant. We didn't even know. Dante squeezed his cup so hard the lid cracked, and hot coffee splashed onto his fingers. He didn't feel the burn. Jesus, Dante. I am so sorry. Monique sat down next to him, putting a hand on his shoulder. I didn't know. Keisha didn't say anything. Me neither. She kept quiet. They sat in silence, broken only by the distant sounds of the hospital, steps of medical staff, the squeak of gurneys, muffled conversations. Dante never touched his coffee. He just held the cup in his hands, feeling the warmth slowly fade away. 40 minutes later, a nurse came out into the hallway and nodded to him. Your wife is in her room. You can go in. Dante stood up and headed toward the indicated door. Monique stayed in the corridor, understanding that this was a moment they needed to be alone. The room was small with 2 beds, but the second one was empty. By the window stood a hospital bed, and on it, covered with a white blanket, lay Keisha. She was as pale as the sheet itself, with dark circles under her eyes, and 4 dripped into a vein in her arm. Keisha was looking out the window, not noticing he had entered. Keisha, he called softly. She slowly turned her head. Her eyes were red, swollen from tears. Dante, she whispered. He approached the bed, took a chair and sat down. Silence hung between them like a heavy weight. Dante didn't know what to say. Words stuck in his throat, seeming inappropriate, empty. Did you know about the pregnancy? He finally asked, taking her hand in his. Keisha closed her eyes, and fresh tears rolled out from under her eyelids. Yes, she exhaled. I found out 3 weeks ago. I wanted to surprise you. I planned to tell you beautifully on our wedding anniversary in a week. I bought little booties. I wanted to cook a special dinner. I dreamed so much of seeing your reaction. Her voice cracked, and Keisha couldn't hold it back. Sobs broke out, deep, desperate, full of pain. She covered her face with her free hand, trying to stifle the sounds, but it was useless. Grief covered her head to toe. Keisha. Dante leaned closer, hugging her by the shoulders. Please don't cry. How can I not cry? She sobbed. I lost our baby. Our little one, Dante. I didn't even get to properly be happy, and now it's gone. I know. I understand. He pressed her to him, feeling his own eyes traitorously tearing up. But you're alive. That's the main thing. You're alive, and you're with me. But the baby. Keisha buried her face in his shoulder. Her body shook with sobs. I'm here, he repeated like a mantra. I'm here, Keisha. We'll get through this together. I promise. But he knew his words were just words. They couldn't bring back what was lost, couldn't heal the wound that would now remain forever in Keisha's soul, and in his own too. They sat like that for a long time. Keisha cried, and Dante held her, stroked her hair, whispered meaningless comforts. Outside the window, it got dark. The hospital corridor emptied. Somewhere in the distance, a door slammed, a cart rolled by. When the tears finally dried up, Keisha pulled away. Her eyes were red and swollen, but a new determination appeared in her gaze. Dante, I need to tell you something, she began hoarsely. What? He tensed, feeling that something important was coming. Today, before I got sick, I received a letter. What letter? Keisha hesitated, clearly choosing her words. There were photos and a note. I need time to think about everything, but I have to make a decision. What decision, Keisha? Explain properly. Dante frowned. I can't right now. I'm sorry. Just give me time. He wanted to insist, but looked at her exhausted face and changed his mind. Now is not the time for interrogations. Okay. Rest. I'll be back tomorrow morning. Thank you, Keisha whispered. Dante kissed her on the forehead and left the room. In the hallway, Monique was dozing on a chair, but hearing his steps, she stirred. How is she? It's heavy, he answered briefly. You going home? Yeah. Need a ride? No, I have my car. They said goodbye, and Dante headed for the exit. But sitting in his car behind the wheel, he couldn't start the engine. His hands were shaking. Fragments of thoughts swirled in his head. The baby, the surgery, Keisha's tears, some strange letter. Something was wrong. Something in her words alerted him, but he couldn't understand exactly what. When Dante finally drove away, Keisha was left alone in the semi-dark room. The bulb above the bed gave off a dim light. She lay staring at the ceiling and felt like everything inside had burned to ashes. Emptiness, pain, despair. And then she remembered the photos. Layla and Sterling, the letter demanding she resign. Keisha slowly rolled onto her side and took her phone from the nightstand. The battery was almost dead, but it would last for one call. She found the name Sterling Holt in her contacts and pressed call. It rang once, twice, 3 times. "Hello, Keisha," her father-in-law answered. His voice was cheerful, satisfied. "Something happened, Mr. Holt." Her voice trembled despite all attempts to pull herself together. "I'm quitting." A pause hung in the air. "How is that?" A note of surprise appeared in Sterling's voice. "Keisha, did something happen? You're one of our best employees. Why did you suddenly decide to leave?" Keisha squeezed the phone hard. "No, just something happened, and it's unlikely I'll find the strength to work anytime soon." It was a lie, but she couldn't tell the truth, not yet. "Are you sure?" Sterling spoke softly. "Maybe you just need a vacation. Rest for a couple of weeks, get your thoughts in order, and then come back." "No. I've decided. I quit." Keisha cut him off. Another pause. She could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. "All right," he finally said. "If that's your final decision, I won't hold you back. But if you change your mind, let me know. The door is always open for you." "Thank you," she squeezed out. "Take care of yourself, Keisha." She ended the call without saying goodbye. The phone slipped from her weak fingers onto the blanket. Keisha turned toward the window. Behind the glass, in the darkness, the lights of the city blinked, indifferent, cold, alien. Tears began to flow down her cheeks again, soundless, bitter. Her life was crumbling. The job she loved was lost. The child she had waited for so long was dead. Her husband was nearby, but for some reason she felt unbearably lonely. And somewhere out there, beyond the walls of this hospital, Layla was triumphing. And Keisha didn't know how to stop her sister. She didn't know if she even had the strength to fight. She closed her eyes, letting the darkness swallow her. Sleep didn't come immediately, but when it did, it brought nightmares. 2 days had passed since Keisha ended up in the hospital. 2 endless days filled with pain, tears, and emptiness. She lay in the room staring at the ceiling, trying to come to terms with what had happened, but coming to terms was impossible. The loss of the child she had wanted so badly left a gaping wound in her soul, and thoughts of her sister and her betrayal only worsened her condition. Keisha barely ate. Nurses brought breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but she hardly touched the food. Everything seemed tasteless, like cardboard. Dante visited every evening, sat beside her, held her hand, but his presence for some reason brought no comfort. He said the right words, but they sounded hollow, as if memorized from a script. On Wednesday afternoon, Monique entered the room. She was carrying a bag of fruit and a box of chocolates. Her friend's face was tense, and immediately Keisha understood something had happened. "What happened?" "Hey, girl." Monique sat on the edge of the bed, placing the bag on the nightstand. "How are you feeling?" "Okay," Keisha lied. "Doctors say they'll discharge me tomorrow." "That's good. Being home heals." Monique tried to smile, but the smile came out strained. Keisha looked at her friend closely. Monique was nervous, twisting the strap of her purse, avoiding eye contact. "Listen, there's something." Monique started and fell silent, clearly picking her words. "Just say it like it is." Keisha leaned back on the pillow wearily. "I lost both my job and my baby in one day. Nothing can surprise me anymore." Monique took a deep breath, as if preparing to jump from a height. "Okay. Basically, they hired Layla for your position. Your sister." The words hung in the air. Keisha froze, staring at her friend. "What?" she asked quietly, not believing what she heard. "Layla was hired for your job," Monique repeated, looking Keisha straight in the eye. "She started yesterday, sitting at your desk, working on your projects." Sterling personally introduced her to the department as the new financial analyst. Keisha was silent. Inside, a wave of rage was building, so strong it took her breath away. So I was right. She set it all up. She squeezed out through her teeth. All this time she was planning to push me out and take my place. Looks like it, Monique shrugged. Turns out she did all this on purpose, the photos, the threatening letter, so that you'd leave and she'd take your spot. Keisha, it's all so disgusting. I don't even know how to work in the same office with her now. And did she say anything? Keisha asked, gripping the sheet in her fist. She acted like nothing happened. Smiled, joked, introduced herself to colleagues as if she didn't drive her own sister to the hospital. There was indignation in Monique's voice. I wanted to go up to her, tell her everything I think, but I'm afraid it'll only make things worse. I don't know what's on her mind. Keisha abruptly sat up in bed and grabbed her phone from the nightstand. Her hands were shaking with anger. She found her sister's name in her contacts and pressed call. Monique got up and walked to the window, giving her friend the chance to talk in private. Ring 1, 2, 3. On the fourth ring, Layla answered. Oh, big sis. Her voice was disgustingly cheerful and happy. How are you doing there? Heard you ended up in the hospital. Nothing serious, I hope. Why are you doing this? Keisha asked sharply, unable to stand even a second of small talk. Doing what exactly, darling? Mocking notes appeared in Layla's voice. Don't play dumb. You know perfectly well what I'm talking about. The photos, the letter, my resignation, and now you're at my desk. Why? Layla laughed lightly, carefree, as if they were discussing the latest episode of some TV show. Sis, everyone fights for a place in the sun however they can, she answered, and there wasn't a drop of remorse in her voice. You didn't think I was going to live in your shadow my whole life, did you? Keisha the genius, Keisha the beauty, Keisha the pride of the family, and me always second, always worse. Well, look, darling, the game has changed. You idiot, Keisha exploded, not holding back emotions. I lost my baby because of you. My child. Do you understand? Because of your dirty games. Silence hung on the line. Keisha could hear Layla breathing on the other end, and then her sister spoke again, and there was something cold, almost indifferent in her voice. Oh well, that wasn't part of my plans, she drawled thoughtfully. Although, maybe it's for the best. Kids are such a drag. Now at least you can focus on yourself. Keisha couldn't believe her ears. Layla didn't even attach any importance to her sister's grief. Not a drop of sympathy. Not a shadow of repentance. Only icy indifference covered by feigned lightness. Are you even human? Keisha whispered, feeling everything inside turning over. How can you say that so easily? Layla cut her off. Listen, I have to work, Someone has to finish your projects. Get well soon, sis. See ya. And she hung up. Keisha stared at the phone screen, unable to move. Monique walked up to her, putting a hand on her shoulder. What did she say? Her friend asked quietly. Nothing, Keisha shook her head. Absolutely nothing. She doesn't care. She doesn't give a damn that I lost the baby. She doesn't care that I'm suffering. To her, it's just a game. Keisha, I understand this is hard for you, but maybe it's worth telling Patricia everything. Show her those photos. Let her know who her husband hooked up with, Monique suggested. No, Keisha shook her head negatively. That will only make the situation worse. Patricia loves me. I can't cause her such pain. If I come to her with these photos, she'll decide I want to destroy their family. She'll blame me, not her husband. That's how it always happens. Then what are you going to do? I don't know, Keisha admitted. I don't know yet. Monique stayed for another half hour, trying to cheer up her friend, but the words sounded empty. When she left, Keisha remained alone with her thoughts. They were dark, heavy, like thunderclouds before a storm. The next day, Keisha was discharged from the hospital. The doctor gave recommendations, prescribed medication, and advised her to rest more. The ride home took 20 minutes. Monique tried to get her friend talking, but Keisha answered in monosyllables, looking out the window at the passing streets. The city seemed alien cold. When they pulled up to the high-rise where Keisha lived with Dante, her friend helped her carry her bag to the apartment. You got this? Monique asked, standing in the hallway. I got it, Keisha nodded. Thanks for driving me. Call me if anything. Anytime. Monique hugged her and left. Keisha closed the door and looked around. The apartment was empty. Dante wasn't there. Silence pressed on her ears. She walked into the living room, sank onto the couch, and took out her phone. She dialed her husband's number. Rings, 5, 6, 7, declined. She tried again. Same thing. Where are you, Dante? She whispered into the void. Hours dragged slowly. Keisha tried to distract herself, turned on the TV, but the programs didn't catch her interest, tried to read a book, but the lines blurred. In the end, she just sat on the couch, staring at one spot. Time was approaching midnight when a key turned in the lock. Keisha flinched and turned around. Dante entered the apartment. He was in a suit, slightly rumpled, with an unbuttoned collar. His hair was messy, his face tired. Oh, you're home already? He was surprised to see his wife. Yes, Keisha stood up from the couch. They discharged me this afternoon. Where were you? I called you, but you didn't answer. Dante walked into the living room, tossing his jacket onto the back of an armchair. Negotiations dragged on, he answered without looking at her. You know how it is with clients. Started discussing the contract at 6 in the evening and only finished now. Keisha stepped closer, peering into his face. Something was wrong. He was avoiding her gaze, speaking too fast. Negotiations until midnight. She raised an eyebrow skeptically. Well, yeah. Difficult client. Dante shrugged and headed toward her to give her a hug. But when he got close, Keisha caught a scent, faint but recognizable women's perfume. Not hers, sweet, with notes of vanilla and jasmine. She knew that scent. Knew it too well. Layla wore that exact perfume. Keisha pulled away, looking at her husband with mistrust. I kind of doubt you were at negotiations, she said slowly, weighing every word. What? Dante frowned. What are you talking about? You smell like women's perfume, and it's not my perfume. She crossed her arms over her chest, waiting for an explanation. Dante froze for a second. Something flickered in his eyes, confusion, fear, but he quickly pulled himself together. Keisha, don't make things up. We were sitting in a restaurant. It was crowded. Probably someone walked by. That's why the smell stuck to my clothes. He tried to smile, but the smile came out unnatural. A restaurant, she repeated, not taking her eyes off him. Yes, a restaurant. Jesus, Keisha, are you serious right now? I just got off work, tired as a dog, and you're staging an interrogation. I'm not staging an interrogation. I just want to understand where you were. I told you. At negotiations. He raised his voice. Don't you believe me? Keisha was silent. Thoughts spun in her head, one scarier than the other. Layla took her job. Layla was Sterling's mistress. And now did she decide to get her hands on her husband too? No. That was too much, even for Layla. Keisha shook her head, chasing those thoughts away. She couldn't allow herself to slide into paranoia. Not now, when everything was crumbling anyway. Sorry, she said quietly. I've had hard days. I'm probably really going crazy. Dante walked up, hugged her, but the embrace was somehow mechanical, devoid of warmth. It's okay. I understand what you've been through. Let's not fight, okay? He kissed her on the top of her head. Go to sleep. You need rest. Keisha nodded and headed to the bedroom. Dante stayed in the living room, took out his phone, and started typing something. She looked over her shoulder and saw him looking intently at the screen, a barely noticeable smile playing on his lips. Closing the bedroom door behind her, Keisha leaned her back against it and shut her eyes. Everything inside tightened into a knot. She knew something was happening, something she didn't see entirely yet, but already felt like an approaching storm. Keisha lay in bed covered with a blanket, staring at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. Thoughts swarmed in her head, giving her no peace. She recalled her sister's words on the phone, her indifference, her cold mockery, recalled the photos with Sterling, recalled the smell of foreign perfume on her husband's clothes. Keisha woke up early in the morning, when it was just starting to get light outside. Dante was sleeping next to her, turned away. She quietly slipped out from under the blanket, trying not to wake him, and went to the bathroom. Washing her face with cold water, Keisha looked at her reflection in the mirror. Pale face, dark circles under her eyes, dull gaze. She barely recognized herself. She needed to get out of the house, distract herself from the thoughts that hadn't given her peace all night. And Keisha decided to visit her mother-in-law. She had a fairly warm relationship with Patricia Holt, as much as was possible with a woman of strict rules and high standards. Her mother-in-law always kept her distance but was never openly cold. Keisha felt that somewhere deep down, Patricia approved of her as a wife for her son, even if she didn't show it openly. Keisha got dressed, choosing a simple dark blue dress and a cardigan, grabbed her purse, and left the apartment. Dante still hadn't woken up. It was crisp outside. The autumn wind rustled the fallen leaves, and gray clouds covered the sky. She walked briskly toward the bakery, located a 5-minute walk from their home. Sweet Haven was Patricia's favorite spot. Keisha knew her mother-in-law adored their vanilla bean eclairs, airy, melting in your mouth with a subtle aroma of vanilla. Every time she visited, Keisha brought these pastries, and it always brought a satisfied smile to Patricia's face. Inside the bakery, it was warm and cozy. Behind the glass cases sat cakes, pastries, eclairs, and small tarts. The aroma of fresh baking made her head spin. An older saleswoman in a white apron stood behind the counter. She recognized Keisha and nodded welcomingly. "Good morning, honey. What are we getting today?" "I'll have the vanilla eclairs, please," Keisha smiled. "Yours are the most delicious. 6 of them, if possible." Of course. Packing them up now." The woman neatly placed the pastries in a beautiful box and tied it with a satin ribbon. "Here you go. Say hello to Mrs. Holt." "I definitely will." Keisha paid and walked out onto the street. She decided to stop back at home to grab her car registration documents. She went up to the apartment, quietly opened the door, and entered the hallway. From the living room came Dante's muffled voice. He was on the phone. Keisha froze, listening. "I did everything just like you said." Dante's voice sounded tense, but there was also some strange satisfaction in it. "Yeah, I personally cut the brake lines on her car. Everything just like you wanted." Keisha felt the blood freeze in her veins. She pressed her back against the wall, afraid to move. "Don't worry," Dante continued. "She won't even suspect. She'll drive to her parents, and at the first turn, I'll see you at your sister's funeral." He laughed loudly. That laugh was so alien, so cruel that Keisha barely kept herself from screaming. Her husband, the man she had lived with for several years, the person she trusted, he planned to kill her. Her hands began to tremble. The box of pastries nearly slipped from her fingers. Keisha carefully backed toward the door, trying not to make a sound. She quietly closed the door behind her and leaned against it, trying to catch her breath. Her heart was pounding so hard it seemed like it was about to jump out of her chest. She had to act fast. Keisha took out her phone and dialed the towing service. "Hello, I need to pick up a car," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "Yes, the car needs to be taken to an address. It's urgent. They promised to arrive in 20 minutes. Keisha went downstairs and sat on the bench by the entrance, clutching the phone in her hand. Thoughts darted through her head, not letting her focus. Dante wanted to kill her. Dante and Layla. They conspired. Her own husband and her own sister. Why? For what? The tow truck arrived on time. Keisha showed where her car was parked in the yard. The workers quickly loaded the vehicle onto the platform. Keisha got into the cab next to the driver, and they set off. "Going far?" the driver inquired, a middle-aged man with a gray beard. "No, about 20 minutes, Keisha answered, looking out the window. The road seemed endless. Keisha tried to figure out what to do next. Go to the police? But with what? She heard a fragment of a conversation. That's not proof, her word against Dante's. She needed something else, something that would force them to reveal themselves. When the tow truck pulled up to Dante's parents' house, Keisha asked to put the car right by the gates. She paid and thanked the driver. Sterling and Patricia's house was a large 2-story estate with a well-groomed garden. Keisha got out of the truck, took the box of pastries, and walked to the front door. She pressed the doorbell. A few seconds later, the housekeeper, Mrs. Higgins, a pleasant middle-aged woman, opened the door. "Hello, Mrs. Holt. Please come in." Patricia is in the living room. Keisha walked inside. The house was filled with light despite the gloomy weather outside. High ceilings, expensive furniture, paintings on the walls. Everything spoke of the owner's wealth and taste. In the living room, Patricia sat in an armchair by the fireplace with a book in her hands. Seeing her daughter-in-law, she set the book aside and stood up. Keisha, what a pleasant surprise. She walked over and kissed Keisha on the cheek. I didn't expect to see you today. How are you feeling? Dante told me you were in 576 in the hospital. Thank you, Patricia. I'm better. Keisha held out the box of pastries. Here, brought you your favorites. Oh, how sweet. Thank you, darling. Have a seat. I'll ask Mrs. Higgins to make some tea. Keisha sat on the sofa. Patricia left the living room to give instructions to the housekeeper. At that moment, Sterling entered the room. He was in a house robe but looked energetic and fit despite being over 50. Seeing Keisha, he raised his eyebrows in surprise. Keisha, what are you doing here? He asked. Stopped by to visit Patricia, she answered calmly. And by the way, brought you a gift. A gift? Sterling frowned. What gift? My car. It's standing by the gates. It's a gift from me and your son. Keisha looked him straight in the eye. Her father-in-law froze. Confusion mixed with weariness appeared on his face. A car? Why, he asked slowly. Just a gift, Keisha shrugged. Thought it would be useful for you. Dante doesn't mind either. Sterling clearly didn't understand what was happening, but anxiety could be read in his gaze. He opened his mouth to say something, but Patricia returned to the living room. Mrs. Higgins is bringing the tea now, she announced, sitting in the armchair. Sterling, you join us too. Sterling nodded and sat opposite Keisha. For a few minutes, they chatted about the weather, about health. Patricia asked how Keisha was feeling after the hospital, asked if she needed help. Keisha answered evasively, trying to act natural. When Patricia left the living room to check on the tea, Sterling seized the moment. He leaned forward, staring intently at Keisha. Keisha, let's be straight, he said quietly but tensely. Why did you decide to quit? Keisha leaned back on the sofa, crossing her arms over her chest. I thought I liked working at your company, Mr. Holt, she said coldly. But apparently I was mistaken. Is it that bad at the company? He frowned. No. Just other circumstances appeared. I thought you loved your wife. Keisha leaned forward, looking him straight in the eye, and weren't cheating on her with young bimbos. Sterling's face went pale. He straightened up sharply, and anger appeared in his gaze. What? He almost shouted. How dare you? But sleeping with my sister, that's normal? Keisha spoke through clenched teeth. I wonder, did you two decide to get rid of me this way together, or was it just her plan? Her father-in-law fell silent. His face turned to stone. He looked at Keisha, and in his eyes she could read shock, rage, and fear. I don't know what you're talking about, he finally squeezed out. You don't know. Keisha smirked. The photos say otherwise, you and Layla in a restaurant, in a hotel, in a car. Want me to show you? I saved everything. Sterling gripped the armrests of the chair. He opened his mouth to answer, but at that moment Patricia entered the living room carrying a tray with a teapot and cups. Mrs. Higgins followed her with a plate of pastries. Here, I decided to bring it myself, the mother-in-law smiled, placing the tray on the coffee table. Sterling, help me please. Sterling silently stood up and helped arrange the cups. Keisha saw how tense his movements were, how he avoided her gaze. Patricia seemed to notice nothing. She chatted cheerfully while pouring tea. Keisha, darling, tell me, how are things with you and Dante? You haven't visited us together in so long, she said, handing her a cup. Everything is fine, Patricia, Keisha lied, taking the cup. Dante works a lot. He has no time. Of course. Men are always busy, her mother-in-law nodded. But you must find time for each other. It's so important in marriage. They continued to chat. Patricia talked about her plans for autumn, about a new book she was reading. Keisha nodded along, smiled, but her thoughts were far away. Sterling sat silently, occasionally sipping his tea. Keisha felt his gaze on her. He was clearly trying to figure out what she was planning, why she came, what she knew, and he was afraid. She saw that fear in his eyes. An hour later, Keisha said goodbye and got up to leave. Patricia walked her to the door. Come again, dear, she said, hugging her daughter-in-law. It's always a pleasure to see you. I definitely will, Keisha promised, walking out onto the street. She called an Uber and began to wait. Inside, everything was trembling. She had made the first move. Now Sterling knew that she was aware of his affair with Layla, knew that she had evidence, and he was scared. This was just the beginning. Keisha felt something new waking up inside her. Not weakness and despair, but cold, calculated determination. They wanted to destroy her. Let them try. She would fight to the end. The taxi pulled up, and Keisha sat in the back seat, looking out the window at the receding Holt house. Somewhere in there, behind those walls, Sterling was probably already calling Layla or Dante, warning them that Keisha knew too much. Let them call. Let them be nervous. The game had just begun. Keisha returned home closer to evening. The taxi dropped her off at the entrance, and she slowly went up to her floor, feeling everything inside tighten in anticipation of something inevitable. The key turned in the lock, and she pushed the door open. It was quiet in the apartment, but the silence was tense, heavy, like before a storm. Keisha walked into the living room and froze on the threshold. Dante stood in the middle of the room holding his phone. His face was white as chalk, eyes wide open, hands shaking. Honey, did something happen? Keisha asked calmly, taking off her cardigan and hanging it on the back of a chair. Dante slowly turned to her. In his gaze, she could read shock, horror, and something else, accusation. Dad. His voice cracked. Dad crashed. Keisha froze. What? How? She stepped closer. Sterling? My God, Dante, what happened? He was driving your car. Dante screamed, his voice breaking into a yell. Why did you give him your car? Why? Keisha stopped a meter away from him, looking him straight in the eye. I wanted to do something nice for him, she answered evenly. Thought it was a good gift. And what happened? What happened? Dante grabbed his head, pulling his hair. The brakes failed. He couldn't stop at a turn and hit a pole. The car caught fire. They barely pulled him out, but doctors say there's almost no chance. The words hung in the air. Keisha stood motionless, not a single muscle twitching on her face. How terrible, she said quietly, but without the slightest emotion. Dante stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. You're not even crying. Not surprised. Like you knew, he whispered. Did you really think it would be that easy to get rid of me? Keisha smirked, and there was nothing warm in that smile, only coldness and contempt. Dante turned even paler, if that was even possible. What are you talking about? He mumbled. What? Get rid of? Don't pretend. Keisha cut him off. I heard your conversation this morning. I personally cut the brake lines on her car. I'll see you at your sister's funeral. Recognize those words. Dante froze as if struck. His mouth opened, but no words followed. You were eavesdropping, he finally squeezed out. Not eavesdropping, just heard. You and Layla were so absorbed in your plan that you didn't even notice I walked into the apartment. Keisha crossed her arms over her chest. By the way, are you aware that Layla is not just your mistress, but also your father's mistress? These words sounded like the crack of a whip. Dante recoiled. His eyes widened to the limit. What? He exhaled. What kind of nonsense are you spouting? No nonsense at all. Keisha took the photos out of her purse and walked up to Dante. She shoved the shots under his nose. They were the same photos. Layla and Sterling in the restaurant, in the hotel, hugging in the car. Here, admire your mistress and your father. Touching, isn't it? Dante grabbed the photos, flipped through them. With every shot, his face became more distorted. He was breathing heavily, hands shaking. No, this is impossible, he mumbled. Layla said, she promised, that she promised. What did she promise? Keisha asked mockingly. That she'd be only yours? That she loves you? Dante, she played you and your father, and you both got caught like fools. Shut up. Dante roared, throwing the pictures onto the sofa. Shut up. You don't understand anything. I understand more than you think. Keisha stepped closer, looking him right in the eyes. You wanted to get rid of me. You cut the brakes so I would crash. But it turned out you almost killed your father. And that is on your conscience. She poked a finger into his chest, and Dante recoiled like from a burn. No, he shouted. No. I didn't want to. It's not my fault. Not my fault. Keisha laughed, but her laugh was bitter. You cut the brakes with your own hands. You planned my death. That is attempted murder, Dante. The victim just turned out to be different. Dante grabbed his head, pacing the room like a trapped animal. This was all your sister's idea, he shouted in hysteria. It was her. She said it would be better this way, that we could be together if you weren't around. She promised everything would go smoothly, that no one would know. And you believed her? Keisha asked coldly. Did you really think Layla was capable of real feelings? She used you just like your father. She wanted to take my place at work, in the family, everywhere, and you were just tools. No. No. Dante sank to his knees, covering his face with his hands. I didn't want to. God, what have I done? Keisha looked down at him, and not a drop of pity remained in her chest. This person wanted to kill her. There was a sharp knock at the door. Keisha turned around. The knock repeated, louder, more persistent. Police. Open up. Dante raised his head, looking at Keisha with wide-open eyes. You called the police, he croaked. Of course, Keisha answered calmly. Did you think I'd just let you walk away? She went to the door and opened it. 2 police officers in uniform stood on the threshold, a middle-aged man with a tough face and a young female officer. Behind them, several more officers were visible. Good evening, the senior officer said. Keisha Holt. Yes, that's me, Keisha nodded. We received your statement regarding attempted murder. Is Dante Holt home? Yes, in the living room. The police walked inside. Dante was still kneeling in the middle of the room, pale and broken. Seeing the police officers, he tried to stand up, but his legs gave way. Dante Holt, the senior officer pronounced strictly, approaching him. You are under arrest on suspicion of attempted murder and causing bodily harm by negligence. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The female officer took out cuffs and put them on Dante's wrists. He didn't even resist, just stood staring into the void. You, he suddenly shouted, turning to Keisha. This is all your fault. If not for you, none of this would have happened. You ruined everything. You. His voice broke into a hoarse howl. The police held him firmly by the arms, leading him toward the exit. Keisha, tell them. Tell them it wasn't me. It's Layla. Layla is to blame for everything. Dante screamed as they dragged him into the hallway. Keisha stood by the window, looking out at the street. She heard his screams, but they didn't touch her. Inside was emptiness. Cold, quiet emptiness. The senior officer lingered, addressing Keisha. You will need to come to the station tomorrow to give a full statement. Here is my card. He handed her a business card. If you remember anything or need help, call. Thank you. Keisha took the card. When the police left, the apartment plunged into silence. Keisha walked into the bedroom, took a suitcase out of the closet, and began to pack. Not everything, only the essentials. Clothes, documents, a few personal items. She didn't want to stay in this city anymore. Too much pain, too much betrayal. There was nothing here holding her back. Her job was lost. Her husband turned out to be a killer. Her sister, a monster. The child who could have been a bright spot in this darkness was dead. Keisha closed the suitcase and looked at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was a stranger, exhausted but strong, broken but not defeated. She took out her phone and dialed Monique. Hello, her friend answered. Monique, it's me, Keisha said quietly. Can I crash at your place tonight? Of course. What happened? Monique sounded worried. I'll tell you later. I'm leaving now. Waiting for you, girl. Keisha ended the call, took the suitcase, and left the apartment without looking back. Behind her remained a life that had crumbled to dust. Ahead was the unknown, but she wasn't afraid. The following days passed in a series of interrogations, meetings with lawyers and detectives. Keisha told everything. About the letter with the photos, about the overheard conversation, about how she gave the card to her father-in-law. The police found evidence: the tampered brakes, security camera footage, text messages between Dante and Layla. Layla was arrested the next day. She tried to flee the city but was caught at Union Station. During the investigation, it turned out that the plan to murder Keisha was developed by her. She had manipulated both Dante and Sterling, promising each love and devotion while wanting only one thing: to destroy her sister and take her place. Sterling died 2 days after the crash without regaining consciousness. Patricia, learning the truth about her husband's affair and that her son had planned a murder, fell into a deep depression. The trial was quick. The evidence was more than sufficient. Dante was sentenced to 15 years in prison for attempted murder and involuntary manslaughter. Layla got 20 years for solicitation of murder and conspiracy. When the sentence was handed down, Keisha sat in the courtroom looking at her sister. Layla turned around, meeting her gaze. There was no remorse in her eyes, only hatred. "You'll regret this," she hissed before the guards led her away. Keisha didn't answer. She had nothing to say. A week after the trial, Keisha bought a train ticket. She was leaving the city forever. Monique saw her off at the station. "Are you sure?" her friend asked, hugging her goodbye. "Yes," Keisha nodded. "I have nothing left to do here. I want to start over in a different place, with different people. I'm gonna miss you." "Me too. But we'll stay in touch. I promise." The train started moving, and Keisha looked out the window, watching the city remain behind, a city where she had lost everything but where she had also found the strength in herself to fight. Ahead was a new life, and Keisha was ready to start it.